All right, today we're going to be discussing a variety of religions. You should have a graphic organizer that looks like this. Now you've got two components to your assignment. One is to read a series of scanned readings that are up on the online classroom. Make sure that you do that. It gives you a lot of the basic info about each of the religions that we're going to be covering today. And you'll also need to put information onto this graphic organizer from the lecture that I'm giving you right now. So by the time you get done, this thing should be pretty well packed out with key ideas. There shouldn't be a whole lot of room. I'm looking for you guys to make sure that you know all the basics as well as some of the philosophy behind each of these religions. So we'll go ahead and get started. I'm just going to preface all of this by saying that most of the religions that we're going to cover today appeared during a time period called the Axial Age. It is a time period that you've already had defined in your do-nows for the morning, so you should kind of be familiar with it. But just to give you some background, we're looking at around the year 500 BCE. And we're looking at a lot of new ideas that were generated by a variety of thinkers in China, India, the Middle East, and Greece. And they were beginning to view humanity and society in new ways. Religions during the Bronze Age period kind of focused on appeasing a variety of polytheistic gods, kind of keeping the gods happy. And the gods were kind of viewed as like super powerful, but still pretty capricious. They acted kind of erratically, especially like in Mesopotamia, as we learned. And the goal of humans was to just kind of keep those gods happy. In the Axial Age, societies start to contemplate bigger questions like, why are we here? How should we behave? What's our soul's purpose? What is the kind of overarching goal of life? Those kind of big idea questions. And so the Axial Age is really about those big questions. And most of these philosophies, well, not most of these, all of these philosophies that we're going to be discussing today are still around, and they're still extremely influential. They're a huge part of kind of the heritage of what still exists from the classical period. There's a really good quote in your Strayer textbook about this time period, and Strayer said, all of these traditions, these meaning the Axial Age traditions, all of these traditions sought an alternate to an earlier polytheism, in which the activities of various gods and spirits explained what happened in this world. These gods and spirits had generally been seen as similar to human beings, though much more powerful. Through ritual and sacrifice, men and women might placate, make happy the gods, or persuade them to do human bidding. In contrast, the new cultural traditions, these Axial Age traditions of the classical era, sought to define a single source of order and meaning in the universe, some moral or religious realm sharply different from and higher than the sphere of human life. The task of humankind, according to these new ways of thinking, was personal, moral, or spiritual transformation. So it's a very personal look at religion. It was often expressed as the development of compassion by aligning ourselves with that higher order. So that's really what we're looking at. A lot of different religions fall under that Axial Age category. Very briefly, I want to review Confucianism and Daoism with you guys. And it's not on your graphic organizer, so just listen and make sure that you kind of understand the background of these to make sure that we're all on the same page. So in China, in the Axial Age, you get two big thinkers, Confucius and Lao Tzu. Confucius is the developer of Confucianism, of course, and Lao Tzu develops Daoism. And their focus is really on social harmony and proper relationships. So there's less of a focus on the gods than there is on how society should work in an era when there are a lot more people and things are a lot more complex. Confucianism first. Confucianism is about morality in the leaders. There are these guys called junzi, or the gentlemen, and these are viewed as really highly educated in Confucian ideology. They know Confucian writing, and their goal is, as the superiors in society, as the gentlemen of society, as the educated in society, they're supposed to give benevolence and justice to the inferior people within society. If they behave correctly, like when the emperor performs his rituals of ancestor veneration properly, then the inferiors in society respond positively to that treatment, and they respond with respect and obedience. So superiors give off benevolence and justice. They are moral, and inferiors respond positively by giving off respect and obedience. And they follow their moral leaders, Confucius said, like the grass follows the direction of the wind when it blows. It's an extremely patriarchal system. Men are always viewed as the superior in these relationships. But the goal is, again, social harmony. Daoism is a lot less structured than Confucianism. Lao Tzu was trying to seek out something that he called the way. I describe this in class as like the Force in Star Wars, okay? And your goal is to follow the way of nature, essentially by doing nothing. So where Confucianism advocates that you work really hard and you gain an education, you study, you try to improve yourself morally and join this class of gentlemen, if possible, Daoism encourages people to extract themselves out of society and join nature, right? This painting that you're looking at right now is actually a Taoist painting. And you can see that the focus is nature, the trees and the mountains, and there's a tiny little guy right here. And these human structures, like this big building over here, are really dwarfed by the nature around it. The focus is nature, not the person, but the person within this huge realm of nature. So again, you're just supposed to extract yourself from society and kind of join in with nature. I thought this was a really good quote you all might like. Lao Tzu said, "Give up learning and put an end to your troubles." So don't do that right now. Don't stop the lecture. Okay. It's sort of the idea that ignorance is bliss, right? Lao Tzu, the legend says anyway, ends his career. He writes this huge book called the Tao Te Ching, where he outlines all of his ideas about the way and nature. And then he just roams out in the wilderness riding a water buffalo and then disappears into the mists of history. So I think that's a great exit for Lao Tzu, riding out on his water buffalo. As another quick review, Greece. We talked about the ideas of Greece already. The Greeks, philosophers, for example, Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle, were very focused on logic and reason. They wanted to learn through observation, especially Aristotle, and they wanted to question traditional ideas in order to test their validity. Again, this is a focus on kind of human society rather than on the gods. And the Greeks' ideas about reason are really, really important for especially European history. We're going to see them crop up again in the 1600s, more than 1,000 years later, almost 2,000 years later. And Europeans will kind of attach themselves to those ideas of logic. Okay. What I want to talk with you all about now is Hinduism. Hinduism, and feel free to kind of fill out your notes with, the text on this page, but also listen to this lecture and add in from that the stuff that you're going to write down in your graphic organizer isn't necessarily on the slides. So Hinduism starts as a religion that's all about ritual. It doesn't have a set founder, but it just arises over a long span of time. And we can see that early aspect of Hinduism being about ritual in the books of the Vedas, especially the Rig Veda. And we read 2 parts of the Rig Veda in class. One section was about Purusha, the god from whose body all of the social classes sprang, like from his mouth came, for example, the Brahmins, and from his feet the Shudra and stuff. We also read from the Rig Veda a portion of text about Indra, the thunder wielder. Okay, this was about these impersonal gods that you needed to appease with the rituals performed by Brahmin, the priests. And those rituals are designed to keep those impersonal, powerful gods happy, the cosmos aligned and functioning properly. And over time, other ideas will begin to develop. And we saw this in class with two different texts that we read, one called the Upanishads and one called the Bhagavad Gita, which is actually an episode out of a larger book. Okay, and the ideas in those books speak about Brahman, and it's a bigger idea, an idea of a universal soul who everyone and everything in the universe is a part of. I describe this as being a chip off the old block. Okay, so every part and every person in the universe is a part of this larger universal soul or Brahman. And your goal in life is to achieve moksha, or the reuniting of your soul with the universal soul called Brahman. Brahman can take a whole lot of forms and pretty much appear as an infinite number of avatars or incarnations. There are three basic ones listed right here, but they're pretty much infinite. So you can think of Hinduism as a polytheistic religion because God takes so many different forms, but again, they're all kind of reunited back into one in that idea of the universal soul. One way to unite with Brahman is through worshiping these different deities, and you'll see a lot of that within different areas of India. Actually have different focuses. Some parts of India worship various incarnations more prominently. But the most important way to unite your soul with Brahman is through living your life well. Hinduism defines living your life well as doing your duties or your dharma through the prescribed jobs of your caste or your social class well. So your goal in life is to do your dharma, your duties, well, and your duties are defined by your social class. In the story we read in class from the Bhagavad Gita, there was this guy Arjuna. He was a Kshatriya warrior, and the god Krishna, who was an incarnation of Vishnu, told Arjuna that every man focused on his own respective duties obtains perfection. Worshipping Brahman by the performance of his own duty, a man obtains perfection. Doing one's own duty badly is better than performing another's duty well. Basically, he said, look, you're a Kshatriya, so you have to be a warrior. You being a bad warrior is better than you being a good Vaishya or being a good Shudra or being a good Brahmin, because that is your caste. So the goal is to kind of honor or worship Brahman or move toward that universal soul by performing the duties of your caste well. And when you do that, you gain good karma, which allows you to get reincarnated up the social hierarchy. Sorry, I went backwards. Very briefly, there's the symbol of Hinduism, if you hadn't already seen it. Okay. In the end, if you focus on completing your caste dharma well, you're going to get reincarnated up the caste system. Eventually, the goal is to reach full enlightenment when you release yourself from all your worldly desires, and that is the moment when moksha is achieved and you rejoin Brahman. Hinduism tends to have very elaborate decorations. We're going to talk about that in, I think, just a few days, but this is a new Hindu temple. You can see it's really highly decorated. And Hinduism, because it's so diverse and because it's so able to accept different incarnations of gods, really doesn't have divisions because it kind of just accepts whatever ritual or whatever worship style or whatever god you're choosing to focus on. Even Buddhism, which comes out of India, which is it originates in India, gets reabsorbed back into Hinduism because that religion is so flexible and able to incorporate all those different ideas and gods and rituals. So that's your quick review on Hinduism. I want to talk about something that we haven't talked about as much now, and that's Buddhism. So flick to that portion of your graphic organizer, and I will move PowerPoints. Hinduism is a pretty important religion. It has an awful lot of followers today, and primarily they're located in Asia. Ironically, they aren't really located in the homeland of Buddhism, which is India, again, because Buddhism gets reabsorbed back into Hinduism. Instead, Buddhists are primarily in East and Southeast Asia. I wanted to put a couple pictures up here for you. This is a Buddhist shrine. This one happens to be in Japan, which is a primarily Buddhist country. Unlike Hinduism, which does not have a founder, Buddhism does have a specific founder. He's a prince in northern India before the start of the Mauryan Empire, and his name is Siddhartha Gautama. He had a really awesome life of luxury in the palace, and the story goes that one day he kind of leaves to go exploring, and outside of his palace walls he sees human suffering. He sees a sick man, an old man, and he sees a corpse, and this experience completely shocks him. He's never seen human suffering. He's lived this life of luxury, and he leaves his family to set out to try to find the root cause of all human suffering. His goal is to end suffering, find the root cause, and then rip it out, I guess, by the roots. He tries a bunch of different techniques to find that root of suffering, but finally, after meditating for a really long time under a tree called a Bodhi tree, he has this eureka moment and develops what he calls the Four Noble Truths. So he reaches this moment of enlightenment, and that's why he's called the Buddha. The Buddha means the enlightened one. Okay. So the idea is, sorry about that. The idea is that it's very similar to Hinduism, again, because this is a religion that arises in India. So the Buddha was very influenced by, of course, his culture and his time period. So his goal is really to attain nirvana. This is the same thing as enlightenment, and that cycle of rebirth, constant rebirth and suffering. And he comes to that realization with something called the Four Noble Truths. And this is what his eureka moment is all about. He understands, finally. And he realized that life is inherently about suffering, and that's noble truth number one. The second noble truth is that he knows that desire is the root of all suffering. And the third noble truth is that if you can release all of your desires, you can get rid of all suffering. And the last noble truth is that you can get rid of your desires by following what he calls the Eightfold Path. So basically, the Eightfold Path are 8 things to focus on to get you to stop wanting stuff like food, shelter, BMWs, pandas, etc. Okay. So that's the basic idea. Here we go. Life is suffering. Suffering is a result of desires. You can get rid of your suffering by getting rid of desires, and you can eliminate desire by following the Eightfold Path. We don't need to know all these different things within the Eightfold Path. Again, it's just trying to get rid of desires. The part that's really radical about his ideas is that he completely, and this is an important point to note down, maybe with a star, he rejects India's caste system completely. This is a social hierarchy that he grew up with in India, but he says that anyone, even women, can attain nirvana or enlightenment at any time. You don't have to go through all those cycles of rebirth up the caste system till you finally reach Brahmin status or priest status, and that's where you have the chance to reach moksha in the Hindu. What he says is that you can reach nirvana anytime, anyone. Nirvana literally means to be extinguished, so in other words, your soul stops being reincarnated and you stop suffering and living a life of desire and suffering over and over and over and over and over and over. Through the Eightfold Path, there's no need to be reincarnated up the caste system. You can probably guess that a bunch of lower caste Hindus and a lot of women are really attracted to the idea of Buddhism. Buddhist women even become nuns, specifically devoted to living in convents and practicing the Eightfold Path together without the leadership of males. Eventually, Buddhism is going to become so popular, as we learned, that Emperor Ashoka will convert to Buddhism and help to spread it by building temples, monuments, stupas, paying for monasteries. And then, during the Gupta Empire, Hindus will actually, as I said before, reassert their dominant position in India, and the Buddha is just taken back into Hinduism as another incarnation of Brahman. And Buddhism will spread through trade routes throughout Asia, and a version called Mahayana, which we'll write down in just a second, which is where the Buddha is believed to be a god, becomes a dominant religion in East and Southeast Asia. Let's talk about bodhisattvas just for a little bit. A bodhisattva is pretty much the same as a saint. It's a person who followed and worked hard in the Eightfold Path to achieve enlightenment or nirvana, but instead of allowing their soul to be extinguished and their suffering to end, these people instead purposefully got reincarnated again to help other people find their way to nirvana. So a bodhisattva is a really important figure, and they're really venerated. They're not worshipped, but they are venerated in Buddhism. And stupas, which you see over on the right, a stupa, is actually a building in which you put the relics of a bodhisattva. A relic is an artifact, like a lock of hair or a piece of clothing that belonged to a holy person, like a bodhisattva. And these stupas become centers of worship for people who practice Mahayana Buddhism. So we'll talk about that. Oh, here's some symbols for you. The Wheel of Life, notice how many spokes there are, 8, to remind you of the Eightfold Path. There's the Holy Book, Tripitaka, which has a lot of volumes in it in English. And here's our probably most important part, the 2 branches of Buddhism. There's Mahayana Buddhism, which worships the Buddha as a god. And this is the division in which bodhisattvas are really important. Theravada Buddhism is more like Buddhism kind of in the way it was originally described by the Buddha, the practice of meditation and attempting to release all of your desires. Most Theravada Buddhists are going to be monks. Most Mahayana Buddhists are going to be normal people who have more common religious practices, like attending worship services and things like that. All right. We're going to do a quick overview of Judaism. We have talked about Judaism before, but this will be a nice review for you guys. So, Judaism. Judaism gets going in the Eastern Mediterranean. This is the Mediterranean Sea right here, and this is the eastern shore of the Mediterranean. Down here is the Sinai Peninsula in Egypt. Way over here somewhere is Italy. Okay, over here is the Arabian Peninsula down there. Okay. Today, Jews live in all kinds of different locations across the globe, but it's still a fairly small religion. Culturally, it's more difficult to convert to Judaism than it is to convert to something like Buddhism or Christianity. Partially because of the different rules and regulations that we're going to talk about in just a little bit. Okay, let's talk about origins. Abraham is the historical figure that Judaism gets attached to. In a larger sense, though, there were an ancient Hebrew people who were very influenced by the monotheistic ideas of Zoroastrianism, which we have already talked about. And the most important part of Judaism is that monotheistic belief in one true God. This God is usually referred to as Yahweh in Jewish holy writings, which should be familiar to you guys because they form the Old Testament portion of a Christian Bible. So for Jews, there is a very special, For Jews, there's a very special covenant that's recorded in Genesis as a conversation between Abraham and God. And the covenant, or the sacred agreement between the Hebrew people and Yahweh, is that their goal is going to be to worship God and only God, and never to turn to any polytheistic religion, and in exchange, Yahweh, or God, is going to be their God and protect them as his special people. And in this part of the world at that time in history, the ancient Hebrews were surrounded by a lot of Mesopotamian polytheistic peoples. And in order to combat the fear that they would sort of be subsumed into the polytheistic society around them, ancient Hebrews developed a set of very strict laws that helped keep them separate intentionally from the societies around them, so that they wouldn't turn away from worshiping their one true God. All of those laws, again, are designed to prevent Jews from assimilating or becoming like the other people around them. In a little bit more basic terms, today in modern Judaism, Jews worship in a synagogue and are led by a leader called a rabbi. In ancient Judaism, there was a temple in which priests performed sacrifices, and that part of the religion no longer exists. The temple gets destroyed actually in about the year 70 after a revolt against Roman control over the area where the Jews lived. All right, let's kind of talk about these laws. So there are 613 different laws recorded in the Torah, or the Old Testament, and they regulate behavior and worship. The most famous of these are the 10 Commandments, but there are 603 others in addition to that, mostly written in the book of Deuteronomy. And these help to, again, prevent assimilation into the population around them. You've probably seen this symbol, the Star of David, I'm sure. All right. The God described in the Torah, or the Old Testament books of Judaism, is a God who cares a lot about people's behavior. He encourages generosity, kindness, behaving selflessly, and a lot of Old Testament prophets talk about how God wants people to change their behavior, to take care of orphans, poor people, widows, and he demands that in order to continue to be his people, the goal is to reform your morals and your heart to focus on the needs of other people. So again, it falls right into line with those other Axial Age religions that are focused on kind of the big picture in life. In modern Judaism, there are several important divisions that we should know about. Everything from Orthodox Judaism, which is the very strict version, to Conservative Judaism, which is strict but not as strict, and Reform Judaism, which is not lax, but certainly less strict about being certain that all 613 laws are followed all of the time. Just as a side item, ladies, you'll like this. Judaism is a matriarchal religion, meaning that your heritage is passed down through your mother. So, in order to be considered Jewish, it's your mom who has to be Jewish rather than your dad. So that's just kind of a nice little side item. You know, the ladies got thrown a bone there, so that was good. All right, our last religion that we need to cover is Christianity. And this religion arises about 500 years after all of the other religions that we just spoke about. So it was a little bit outside of the Axial Age. And about 500 years after the Buddha and Confucius and the ancient Hebrew prophets, Jesus is born in the Middle Eastern portion of what was the Roman Empire. And he was Jewish, but he had very specific ideas about how to live a good life or a moral life. You're probably familiar with famous quotes, like from the Sermon on the Mount. I have a quote here when Jesus said, "You've heard that it was said, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you." So it's a really kind of radical reshifting of the way you assume that people should logically behave. So the founding comes really after the life of Jesus. So Jesus is executed by the Roman government because local Roman leaders felt that his teachings threatened their political control and centralization of their empire. And after his death, his followers become the first Christians. And at first, Christianity is actually just a sect within Judaism, but it very quickly begins to separate because Christians worship Jesus as God. The idea is that he was the Messiah, who they were looking for to kind of open up a new chapter in global history. Early Christians are led primarily by Peter and Paul, and it is Paul who writes most of what we know of as the New Testament. And Peter and Paul are both going to work to convert other people to this new belief in Jesus as Messiah. Early Christianity has a lot of similarities to Buddhism because it preached that any person, regardless of their gender or social status, could have a close connection with God and reach heaven. And Christianity grows very, very quickly because people are very attracted to its message of equality, living a life that's about trying to help others, and also worshiping that one true God and his son Jesus. By about 380, by 312, Christianity is made legal within the Roman Empire, and by 380, it's actually the official ideology and religion of the Roman Empire. You can see how quickly the religion actually begins to take over. And later, you'll eventually begin to see several different sects of Christianity develop, or divisions that develop. There are a lot of different types of leaders within the Christian church, pastors or priests. There's always a person who leads the worship service, and it depends what sect that the Christian belongs to determine what their leader will be called and what kind of role they'll actually have. Christians worship, of course, in places called churches. In Catholicism, the place where a bishop actually has his seat is called a cathedral or a basilica. This one is Notre Dame in Paris on the River Seine. And in Christianity, there's a very interesting conception of God. Christianity is definitely a monotheistic religion, but it conceives of God as being in three parts. And I have a little diagram that I found online that I thought explained the concept well. So in Christianity, these three components are all considered God, but they are not considered synonymous with one another, which is a really complex idea to think about. And a lot of Christian theology is about trying to understand and dissect that concept of God, which is a new and kind of unusual concept for how God operates. All right. I think that's pretty obvious. We'll kind of move over that part. All right. After Jesus dies, and that new religion and the new religion begins, there's a lot of persecution before it is made a part of the official Roman ideology. And the important part here, I think, is the eventual split between the Eastern and Western sections of the Roman Church, which creates several different branches of Christianity. So, two of the most major branches are Roman Catholicism, which is led by a man called the Pope, who is actually the Bishop of Rome. Another one is the Eastern Orthodox Church, which is led by a man called the Patriarch, and he has his seat in Constantinople. He is the Bishop of Constantinople. And both the Pope and the Patriarch lead those two churches, and those are really the main divisions of Christianity. Later on, in 1517, the church is going to break again, and a branch called the Protestant branch will be created in reaction, actually, to the Catholic Church. There is one other that I don't have down on this PowerPoint for some reason, but it's called the Coptic Christian Church. The Coptic Christian Church is based in the Middle East, and there are about 10% of Egypt, for example, is Coptic Christian. So it's an Arab church or a North African church, but it's independent of both the Orthodox and the Roman Catholic Church, and it's not associated with the Protestant Church either. It actually has its roots in the original spread of Christianity out of the Middle East during the Roman Empire period. Interestingly, this is another parallel with Buddhism. Similar to Buddhists, most Christians think very highly of figures called saints, similar to the Buddhist idea of bodhisattvas. And in most sects of Christianity, most churches are actually built over the relics of a saint, and the altar always contains relics. Most Christians feel that these people who are especially good at doing the will of God are examples that should be followed. So that's, again, another strong parallel between Christianity and Buddhism. And although the religions at their core are extremely different, you'll see that there's a lot of overlap between the two, and the AP test likes to kind of point them out and bring them up. So I think it's good to understand the similarities in terms of their founders and in terms of their beliefs and practices. Okay, I think we're actually good. If you guys have any questions about these religions, there's a huge number of resources available online. And feel free to bring any questions that you have to class with you. We'll be happy to chat about anything that we missed or skipped over. And hopefully I can stop my video for you guys. Maybe not.